Now today, Yamaha announced finally the full details of their R9 sports bike, and this has to be one of the most anticipated new motorcycles of the past few years. So let's not waste any time and jump into the 11 key things that you need to know about it. As expected, this bike gets their CP3 triple-cylinder engine in its latest Euro 5 Plus emissions regulations compliant form. And look, what I will say is it's really unusual for Yamaha to adapt their engines for different genres of bike. So if you think of their CP2 Twin, for example, which is used in the Tenere 700 adventure bike, R7 sports bike, MT-07 Naked, Tracer 7 Tourer, XSR 700 Retro, it's in the exact same state of tune across all those bikes. Now in the press release for this new R9, there are no absolute specifics on the performance. I'm sure they'll be available on the website now, but they do confirm the peak power figure will be 119 PS, which is exactly the same as the Tracer 9, MT-09 and XSR 900. So yeah, I do think it is probably the exact same tune, and that would mean that the peak power figure should arrive at 10,000 RPM, and peak torque is probably 93 Nm produced at 7,000 RPM. They do, however, mention some slight tweaks to the ignition timing, the fuel mapping, and also the final drive ratio, so there might be some small differences in terms of how it feels in practice. Now, in my experience, this is such a fantastic engine that just pulls and pulls, has a brilliant soundtrack, and also works really nicely in all those other bikes they've used it in, so I think it's going to suit this one down to the ground. And whereas with the R6, which is now discontinued, this bike kind of replaces it, where it had a smaller engine, an inline 4, and you had to rev it to get the most out of it, the CP3 in this bike brings a lot more mid-range, and so it should still be a decent track bike, but also, I think, a little bit better for the open road. Now, like many of the other models in this 900 lineup, it uses an aluminium delta box frame, although they do say that this frame is specifically developed for the R9 and in all three directions, so torsionally, longitudinally and laterally. They say this frame is stiffer than all the other CP3 models. They go on to say they've used specific thicknesses, shapes and machined holes to balance that stiffness with also a bit of flex in order to make sure the rider gets the right amount of feedback and comfort. Now, the weight of the frame alone is said to come in at 9.7 kilograms, which apparently makes it the lightest frame ever used on a Yamaha Supersport bike, and that's got to be one of the contributing factors that means that this bike tips the scales at just 195 kilograms wet, which I think is pretty decent. Now, like I said, the R6 is discontinued, so is the R1, and you can only buy them, at least in Europe anyway, in a sort of track form. But if we use them as a bit of a benchmark, the R9 sits about 10 kilos heavier than an R6, 5 or 6 kilos less than an R1, and so as you probably anticipated, it's pretty much somewhere in the middle of the two. Speaking of the R6 though, the Yamaha engineers say in this press release that they use that bike as the benchmark for the R9's aerodynamic efficiency because it's a small, slim bike that cuts through the air with fairly minimal drag. Thing is though, they claim that through using lots of wind tunnel testing, they've actually managed to achieve less drag out of the R9, and that's despite the fact that you've got a bigger engine, bigger radiator, and also this bigger frontal area. On top of that, they've also fitted it with the fashionable aero winglets that do, I would say, contribute to the looks a bit. It's something you'll see on almost all race bikes now, and I think it adds a little bit here. But they also claim it reduces front wheel lift by 6 or 7%, although they don't claim at what sort of speed. And then combined with the front end spoiler, they claim up to 10% during cornering. Now generally, winglets do look a bit garish, but like I said, I don't really mind the looks of these, so let me know what you think of them down in the comments. Suspension comes from KYB, and they say that both the fork and shock are newly designed for this model and developed actually alongside the new track editions of the R1s, so the R1 Race and the R1 GYTR. It's a 43mm upside down fork up front that offers plenty of adjustability, with individual adjusters for both compression and rebound damping on the left and right fork tubes, and you've also got high and low speed adjustability. And then the rear shock is adjustable for preload, rebound and compression, but also with this new layout that they claim gives it really precise damping and therefore greater feedback from the road surface. As for the brakes, well, you've got top-notch Brembo-style Yamaha calipers, which are, as you'd expect from a premium sporty offering like this. And it comes with steel-braided hoses as standard, and also large diameter 320mm discs to clamp down on. Then you've also got a Brembo radial master cylinder, which should give it plenty of feel at the lever. And so all round, I think it's fair to say that braking looks like it shouldn't be a problem at all. I think one of the concerns though with a bike like this that's clearly built for a little bit of track action but also the road is that they might have watered down the riding position to make it road friendly, and that'd leave some of the more experienced or dedicated sport riders with a riding position that feels a bit unsatisfying. Now the seat height comes in at 830mm, which I think is going to be in the right spot for this sort of bike. It's not super tall and high, but it's enough to get you in that tail up position. And then they say the clip-on handlebars, well, they actually do come below the top yoke, which, you know, on some of the more relaxed sports bikes, especially intended for the road, they're typically risen up a bit. But these ones are apparently more aggressive than the R7, but not so low and far forward as something like the R6 Race. So yeah, I think giving the R7 as a reference point is a really good move. I'd say that's the most aggressive in terms of bar position of the affordable middleweight sports bikes. And so any concerns about the R9 being too sat up should probably be put to bed. Now naturally they say the tank shape is narrow and optimized for a sporty ergonomic with the intention to provide grip for your legs and arms to give the rider some stability through the corners. And it comes in at 14 litres, which I think is pretty much what you'd expect for this genre of bike. As for tyres, well, it comes with Bridgestone's Battleaxe Hypersport RS11s, which I must admit isn't a tyre I've got any experience of, but they do say in the press release that it should give you track levels of performance but tuned for use on public roads. Generally that'll mean you'll find a fairly sporty tread pattern, but also with a compound that warms up relatively quickly, and that'll make it safe for moderate speeds on the roads and different weather conditions. So it sounds like a good match for this sort of bike, although probably something people will swap out if they really are taking the trackside more seriously. Now techie features are absolutely abundant on this bike, with a lot of stuff that they say is inherited from the R1, and it starts with 3 default riding modes of sport, street and rain. On top of that though, you've got 2 custom modes and 4 track modes, through which you can dial in the amount of power, traction control, slide control, brake control, back slip, engine braking, wheelie control as well, and this can all be configured either through the dash or through the Yamaha smartphone app. Now you've got an inertial measurement unit that feeds lean angles into all of those rider aids, so it's very up to date and should be up there with the most advanced bikes in terms of how they behave. And for the track, it's also worth pointing out that you can completely disable ABS at the rear, and you've also got launch control as well for making those quick getaways from the line. Naturally, there's a quick shifter as standard, which will give you those clutchless up and down shifts. On top of that, in terms of road features, you've got cruise control and a speed limiter, which I think are always useful, and the 5-inch TFT display, as you'd expect for a bike in 2025, comes with smartphone connectivity so you can handle calls and things like that. As for colours, well, you can either choose from Icon Blue or Tech Black, which is absolutely par for the course for a Yamaha sports bike. It's pretty much all they offer them in. And styling wise, it looks exactly how you'd expect a Yamaha R9 to look. It's very much part of that R family, but just with the CP3 proportions. On to the price, and this one will come in at £12,250, and they'll be available from Yamaha dealers from March 2025. And to be honest, that's exactly where I'd expect it to come in, with a spec that's really quite similar to something like the MT09 SP Naked, and that one sells for 11,806, so you're basically paying another 450 quid for the full sports bike treatment. So look, I don't think there are any massive surprises with this one. The base for this bike, the CP3 engine, some of the other CP3 powered bikes were already really very good, and they already had the know-how in terms of building sports bikes, so it seems like a fairly simple assignment, and this is what we've got. Thing is though, I'd love to know from you in the comments, with the amount of hype around this bike in the build-up, as to whether it meets your expectations, or do you think there's anything more they could have done to make it that little bit more exciting? Personally, I absolutely can't wait to ride one, but in the meantime, I'll leave my MT09 review with which it shares a platform, so you can give it a click and give it a watch in case you haven't already. Also, do hit subscribe for more of the latest motorcycle launches right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.